Welcome to episode 11 of the Mindset Advantage podcast with Dr. Tricia Cardner and Elliot Rowe. So Tricia, tell us about yourself.
Hey everyone, it's Dr. Tricia Cardner and I'm the author of Positive Poker along with Jonathan Little, and I do everything I can to help people improve their mental game.
And my name is Elliot Rowe. I'm a hypnotherapist and I work with poker players and UFC fighters. So Tricia, what news do you have for us this week?
Well, I wanted to do something just slightly different, Elliot, because we're just a few weeks out from the World Series and I'm trying to give, tips so people and players who are going out can, prepare themselves. So I just wanted to talk for a couple minutes about players building themselves a mental game checklist. And this is something that I have my clients do. And basically, you want to come up with a list of things. So it would be like, how's your breathing, your self-talk, visualization, goal setting, all those sorts of kind of mental game tactics. And then what you want to do is you want to rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10 on how well are you doing with that particular skill. So 1 would be, I'm really not doing well, and 10 is I've completely mastered it. And then look at that list and pick 1 or 2 areas that need work. And for the next 21 days, work on that. So if you picked, say, meditation, so then commit for the next 21 days, you're going to meditate at least 5 minutes a day, each and every day. And that's really going to get you some good improvement in those 1 or 2 areas you chose to work on.
And there's still certainly plenty of time, isn't there, for people to get ready, especially for the main event. These small changes in your daily routine could really make a difference when it's time to go and sit down there at the table.
Absolutely. So get on it now. You can't change 100 things, but you can certainly change and improve 1 or 2 things.
Definitely really good advice there. And today on the show, we've got Brian Rast, a very well-known poker player, coming on, and he's going to talk to us about the importance of mindset in his game and his career. So we'll give him a call now. Hi, Brian. Thanks for coming on the show. If you could introduce yourself to our listeners.
Yeah, thank you, Elliot and Tricia. I am Brian Rast. I have been playing poker for about 11 years. I stopped going to school in order to do it, and it's pretty much been all I've done since then. So, I've played a lot of cash games, and more recently I've done tournaments off and on to varying degrees, and my main games are No Limit Hold'em and Pot Limit Omaha. But at this point, I have quite a bit of experience in almost all the poker games, although, I still think the first 2 I mentioned are my best. So that's kind of me in a nutshell.
So you've been around the poker scene for a really long time, and I bet you've seen a lot of people come and go through those years. What in your opinion makes somebody, go from good to great and to really be able to stick around in the game?
So I actually think there are 2 different answers to those questions. It's separate. The thing that makes someone go from good to great is, mostly at that point a question of talent. I think with enough studying and being a reasonably intelligent person, like a lot of different people can get good at poker. But there's sort of like a synergistic mix of skills between, your logical reading abilities, your intuitive ability to maybe emotionally understand where people are, during a poker session, how they're doing psychologically to kind of win that psychological warfare game. Whatever it is that a mix of those or being really good at any one in particular that can kind of take someone from the level from being a good poker player to a great one. So I think that's mostly a talent question, and there's a couple different talents or mix of talents that you can have in order to make that happen. But what makes somebody last? Talent helps. The better you are, the more likely you are to earn. But I actually think the number one thing in lasting in the poker world is probably self-control. It's basically the ability to not gamble for more than you should risk, know what size games you're playing, be able to evaluate whether or not you're plus EV in a certain game, know when to quit when maybe you're not, or you're tired, or you're not playing your best, and basically just manage your money and manage yourself. You can be not a great poker player, but you could have a career and do fine just because you're very good at managing yourself and your money.
And do you think more players fall out because of gambling too excessively on the poker table, or do you think it's those other temptations, the leading into sports betting, the pit games, things like that, take more of the professional players out?
Obviously both of them, but definitely now that I'm more of a live player, I think for live players it's definitely more the second one, the other temptations, because a live player, you have to be around casinos and all that. And, sometimes you're always given time, like when you're playing live, sometimes it can be a little bit more boring. People start betting sports, just walking in and out of a casino. There's always a temptation to gamble, or just being in a lot of places, like Las Vegas, there's other things, drinking and whatnot. So I think for live players, it's definitely more the second one. For internet players, I think it's probably a little bit more the first one. Internet players, it's more of a situation where there's always very easy access to games that are bigger than what you should play. So there's, if you're down one star to get even. So whereas it's a little bit harder to bet sports, maybe you actually have to load money up on a different website, whatever, and gamble on there a lot of times. So I think for online players, it's probably more keep playing games you shouldn't. Whereas for live players, it's the other temptations.
I did some research with poker players and MTT players in particular who had been very successful. And the number one thing they talked about was bankroll management, which I think surprises a lot of people. And now here you're kind of saying the same thing, as part of the self-control.
Yes. Yeah. Bankroll management, personal management, tilt control, just like this idea of self-control, I think. I agree 100%. I mean, I actually feel like I've always been a little bit ahead of the curve with that. It's something... just my approach from poker, I sort of understood that even when I was younger. And in a certain sense, I think I molded it pretty well to my life. I've never went broke, but when I was younger and I was single and I didn't really have any responsibilities, I did, take more risk. But, the flip side was there wasn't really that bad if, I had more than one occasion where over some period of time I lost over half my bankroll. But, at some point I would just play smaller games where, my risk of ruin would go way, way, way down. And not only that, the competition was softer and generally I would win and be able to, build back up. From a situation, though, where I wasn't desperate, years ago, but my cushion was always 100,000 liquid bankroll, which is plenty to play the live 5, 10, or 10, 20 games back at the time in Las Vegas or LA, which were very soft, and some smaller games online.
And you mentioned tilt control. Is there anything you've done specifically to improve your tilt control in the game?
There hasn't been any sort of long-term focused thing that I've done. I've thought about it. I've read various things about it. I have from various times, I've done some meditation. But I'd say the biggest thing that's really happened with it is I feel like I'm a pretty aware person of what's going on with me. And I think tilting was something, especially when I started playing. Poker is very different than how I had experienced kind of life and evaluating myself. I mean, I think with most things prior to poker, when I was in school, you for the most part, you just get successes. I had a long history of going to school and doing very, very well. And even in university, when I struggled, I knew in very large part it was just because I wasn't really putting in the effort. I didn't care anymore and my grades weren't very good. But in poker, I cared very much about my results, but yet there were plenty of times when I'd walk away from the casino or I'd log off the online site and I lost. And so it was very frustrating at first for me because I wasn't that used to dealing with failure. I mean, I feel like I, over a long period of time, was able to slowly learn how to cope with that personally if from the outset I wasn't necessarily ready. I remember some of the ways I dealt with failure. I remember when I first dropped out of college, there were some times I would drive home from the casino, literally talking to myself and get home and be pacing my apartment, not yelling at nobody or just upset because, I had lost this money and I couldn't believe that this had happened and blah, blah, blah. And I kind of think back now and it's I would never even do anything remotely near to that. So the process internally, it's way different than it used to be.
And out of interest, do you think that's turning it from seeing it as a short-term game to a long-term game? So rather than trying to win over a hand or a session, you're now looking at the long term, or is it something else you think you've created there to help you through that variance?
I definitely think that's part of it. I think part of it is realizing that these things happen and it is a long-term game. I mean, I think another part of it is learning just to accept failure, that failure is part of success in poker, or indeed many things in life, that these things will happen and really kind of the measure And even more than that, like the way to really achieve success is to not let these failures deter you and not let them change your state of mind. So that, despite that these things are happening, like really the way that really exacerbates them is you changing your behavior, tilting, playing worse, making bad decisions. That's kind of what makes these things bad. In and of themselves, they're just events where I'm playing a game where I'm gambling and bad events are going to happen. It's just part of the game.
I deal with a lot of players who are not as well developed, strategically, and they really tilt hard and, don't deal with failure well. What kind of advice could you give to, a player like that?
I think I said this, there's a sense of self-awareness. Mm-hmm. So I think it's important once you feel like these feelings coming on that you're immediately aware of them. I think that's the first step. The next step would be, okay, so what are you going to do about them? Whatever it is. I mean, if you need to walk away from the table and miss a couple hands in order to, talk to yourself, calm yourself down, change your state of mind, if you need to quit because whatever's happened is so bad. I mean, I think that once you're aware of them and then you start taking steps, and then obviously there's things you could probably do that are away from the table that I'm going to be honest, I haven't really done a lot of that. Throughout my career, I was kind of a fighter. I fought through a lot of this stuff. I didn't always walk away from the table. I had relatively good self-control, although there were definitely times when I was younger, and even to this day that I can tilt. I'd say nowadays I find my tilt to be a little bit different than when I was younger. There were a lot of different ways. Obviously there's loser's tilt or when things are going bad. But when I was younger, I also used to have winner's tilt sometimes, like things were going really well. And I used to get, I think, an inflamed ego and think I could do too much at the table during hands, maybe trying to do something that I realized later was just kind of me getting carried away with sort of what I could do or get away with or whatever the case may be. So I think, the first step is to be aware of it. And then once you know that you're doing it or you're aware of that feeling, trying to capture it in the moment and change it, which that's very difficult. So I don't really know how, I don't know how to do that. So.
And you've got the seminars that you're running at the World Series of Poker, which is sort of more of a holistic approach, aren't they, to poker? Can you talk a bit about that and explain what you're doing differently to perhaps some of the other training groups out there?
Well, can I ask you guys, because this is actually would be your area of expertise, because I felt a little lost answering that question. What do you recommend for players? Because I'd love to hear before, let's remember this question and get it next bit.
Well, there's so many things, but I think one of the most efficacious things that people can do to raise their self-awareness and decrease stress and all that sort of thing is to develop a meditation habit, or sometimes it's called mindfulness or mindfulness meditation. And I know Elliot probably is going to agree with that.
Yeah, obviously with the hypnotherapy side, the mindfulness is really, really useful in terms of clearing your mind, being able to cope with that variance and the swings. I think if it's very specific issues, so someone's getting the same emotion coming up time and time again, serious anxiety, serious levels of anger, a gambling problem, then I would say more the therapy route. So with the sort of work that we do with individual clients, working through those issues, understanding where they're coming from so that you're not having that emotional response to the same level at the table. The other things are just the general professionalism. So, making sure you've eaten before you play, having a good exercise routine, having some rules in place regarding bankroll management and just length of session. Those sort of things can make a huge difference as to how long you can last at the table without tilting.
And the other thing is really learning what your triggers are for self-sabotage. And for most people, they're not really aware of that. But if you start kind of tracking it, so fear of failure is common, but the other side of the coin, fear of success, is also very common. Even though that sounds weird, like why would I be afraid of success? But, with every new level comes a new devil, the saying goes. Yeah. So it can be, as the expectations get greater, the perceived pressure gets greater. So a lot of different things. But I really love that you hit on how self-awareness is the most important, because I completely agree with that. If you're not aware, how can you even think to get, help?
Yeah, it's interesting hearing you guys talk about that. I mean, I will say in my poker career, it's almost like I've expected myself not to really have much of a limit with things. I mean, I've multiple times played 40-plus-hour sessions, and actually most of those sessions are because I'm winning. Because if I was having a really bad session at some point before that, I probably would have quit. So it's that I'm winning a lot in a big game. Usually, there have been a couple times when they were bad sessions.
I mean, if you think of those sessions, I'm assuming that you're one of the professionals at the table. Although you might be tired, it's very likely that the recreational player at the table or weaker player is far more tired than you, and you're sitting there with an enormous edge. And there are a lot of players out there who, if they try and do that 40-hour session, but without being physically fit, without being mentally prepared, that 40-hour session could absolutely destroy their bankroll.
Yes. I did have a little bit of training even starting out. I mean, there were some times when I was playing small limit in the casinos or even just online sessions where I would push, the 24-hour barrier, maybe not go to 40, but, in some of those sessions, I don't know, helped train me to be able to deal with it. And so, later in my career, there were some times I was in Macau in like amazing games with weak players who just wouldn't quit until they basically lost what they had in front of them or had some amazing win. They just wanted to keep playing. And, I actually always felt during those sessions that as it went on and a lot of the pros stayed, there'd be a very small turnover. But, there were a lot of the people who were in the game for 20, 30, the whole 40 hours, whatever it was. I almost felt stronger as the game went on just because of some of that. Because I think it's very hard to play poker for that long, to sit at a table and stay focused and stay tough. That's really one of the biggest things. I find that at some point at about 15 hours or even sooner for some people lose their toughness. It's very hard to do active things like 3-betting and playing tough. People start playing a more passive style at some point because it's easier.
Yeah, I mean, that's an incredibly long session. And in those games, is there a risk that if you leave, you won't get another do you always have access to those games, whatever happens?
Well, the biggest risk is that there's just, a lot of these games that I'm talking about were sort of at a casino, and there's sort of no guarantee that whoever the person you're playing with will come back again. And, I remember one of the particular games, there were a couple weaker players, and one of the weaker players had run it up to having $250,000 US. And so a lot of the pros had added on money, and everyone just kept playing, and there's just almost no guarantee that situation is going to happen again. Like, I'm not talking about this in the sense of this is like a private game, like the LA private games or something, where I know this game is going to happen again with kind of the same players 3 days from now or next week at the same time. I think in those type of games, it's a lot more common for people to quit after playing 12 hours because everyone kind of knows the game's going to happen. But I've actually played very few private invite games in my career. There's almost all casino games in which it's sort of like, this is it, and maybe whoever it is going to come back or maybe not. But when you get up, you won't be able to get back in the game again because there's generally a list. So you got to strike while the iron's hot type of deal.
Exactly. You wouldn't want to give up that opportunity because you'd never know if it's coming back again. And, that guy's there with his $250K and, either he loses it and leaves or he just leaves and he never comes back or disastrous.
Or maybe he will, but, this is in China. It's not like he has my number and he's going to ring me up the next time he comes back. Also, when I go to China, I'm there a couple times a year for a few weeks, or at least that's what I used to do. So even if he came back like 2 weeks later, I might not be there. So that's oftentimes another part of it.
And it's interesting to talk to someone who's been in the big games in China and in Las Vegas. And is there a big difference in terms of style of play between the cultures?
At first, I would say there's a difference in the style of play in the sense of what I'm just talking about. I think a lot of times the Chinese players are just more hardcore. I think there's a number of Chinese recreational players who you can expect that they just won't quit until they lose their money, or they just have some really, really big win. So, usually it's lose their money. So that's different. I think oftentimes in the US, it's not quite as do or die, so maybe the sessions don't go as long. Now, that's not always true. I'm just saying it tends to be true. there's definitely people in both countries that will go the opposite way. And in terms of style of play, I think the Chinese recreational players, on the average, tend to be a little bit more looser. They'll tend to play a little bit more hands. They tend to probably bluff and call a little bit more. I mean, not a lot, but that's pretty good mix of the two. So, I mean, they're a little bit more likely if they have nothing to maybe bluff and a little bit more likely to call down weak. The pots will probably be a little bigger because that's like less folding sort of on both ends. So that can be pretty tough.
This is a little bit off the track because it's not about, playing in China, but rather a huge game that's coming up this summer, the Colossus. Everybody and their mother is excited about this 565 buy-in at the World Series. Do you have any tips that you could share quickly for our listeners who are excited about going to the Colossus?
So this is probably, because it's the lowest buy-in tournament, it'll be maybe the first or one of the first tournaments, I guess, for World Series tournaments for more inexperienced people. Mm-hmm. I mean, I would say the first thing that comes to my mind as a general tip would be, it's a long tournament. It's probably going to be like a 4-day event or something like that. So it's going to take a long time to win the tournament. You're not going to win the tournament on day 1 or day 2 or, even day 3. You don't win it till you get to the final tables. So just remember to stay patient and kind of let the cards come to you. Now, that's assuming that you have like a reasonable stack size. Obviously, at some point, when your M gets low, you need to start looking for ways to pick up chips, to not just like blind out. But, that gets into more strategic considerations about like, what hands do you open shove or, re-raise from what positions. But just in general, I would say you want to, stay patient. It's a long tournament. I think a lot of people who are more inexperienced, they're used to just one-day tournaments, right? Like you go to a casino, you buy in for the $100 or $50 tournament. That tournament's over that day. I mean, this is a 3 or 4 day tournament. So the blind structure will be longer than what you're used to. And, maybe you're in a little bit less of a rush than tournaments that have like 15 or 20 minute levels. You're not going to be all of a sudden, like the whole table is not going to have 15 big blinds in like 2 hours. So there's going to be a lot of play throughout most of the tournament, and you should, act accordingly.
And I guess that's the perfect segue, taking us back to your seminars at the World Series before the Colossus. So do you want to talk to us about what it is you guys will be covering?
Yeah, so we're going to have a 1-day class right before the World Series that's going to cover cash games. I believe it's going to be a cash game seminar. And yeah, it's going to be a little bit of lecture, but mostly just hand labs where, people will play through hands and, pros will analyze. Like myself, I will be there. I'll analyze kind of what people are doing and what they could have done differently. And, maybe discuss, as it's good going into the World Series, to get a leg up on your strategy and get some insight from, someone like me who's been around and might have a thing or two to teach you about how to play poker right.
And are you looking forward to the World Series yourself? Is it still an exciting time of the year for you, even after all of these years?
Yeah, the World Series has actually gotten more exciting for me than it was maybe 5 years ago, but it's not quite what it was like the first time that I went. Since I was predominantly a cash game player for a while, after initially going to the World Series and having things not work out too well, I kind of just didn't play very many tournaments. And there was even one World Series where I missed it to go to Macau. And I just was like, whatever, it's a bunch of tournaments. I just want to play cash. I've had tournament success, and I play more tournaments maybe than I used to. I do look forward to the World Series coming around. And it's maybe not went to, because it was, a new event. And you're always, whenever it's something new in your life, you're always excited in a way because you're going to experience something you've never experienced. Now it's not quite as eager, but I definitely look forward to it. It's a time where I'm going to see a lot of people who I've met over the years, and I kind of only might see them during the World Series. And, everybody comes, and poker players there's a bunch of interesting, exciting tournaments and just good action for a month and a half. So even outside of the tournaments, there'll be games at the Bellagio, the Aria, the Rio. And yeah, it's a good time of the year.
And I assume you'll be playing the one drop?
Actually, this year, the one drop is the 100K one, not the million one. And I will play that. But the biggest tournament this summer, I don't know if you've heard of it yet, it's called the Super High Roller Bowl.
Okay.
Do you guys know who Carrie Katz is?
Yes.
So Carrie Katz has been running these one-day high roller tournaments at the Aria for the last like year and a half. And he's actually starting a poker TV channel. And as part of starting it, he's running like this super high roller bowl, which is going to be 1 or 2 days of like televised high stakes cash games, and then a $500,000 buy-in tournament, which he isn't raking.
Wow.
And so there's no rake, and there's going to be some amateurs like himself who play it. There's a website, I think it's like superhighrollerbowl.com. I mean, the number of players who have committed, although, albeit they haven't put up the 500K, they've made a verbal commitment, is starting to get very large. Like the last I looked, it was like 50 or 60. And this isn't even including, some people who might kind of sign up and play more on a last minute basis.
Wow, so the biggest tournament might be at the Aria this year.
Yes, it looks like the biggest tournament this summer, other than the main event, is going to be, I don't know if it's at the Aria, but it's wherever he's having this super high roller bowl.
Wow.
5 buy-in, no rake. It'll be televised. I don't know if it's going to just come out on his poker TV channel or it's going to be on another network as well before it goes on that channel, because that channel's not obviously up yet. So I don't know exactly. But yeah, I would look out for that one this summer, because that will be the biggest tournament other than the main event.
Yeah, that sounds amazing.
Yeah, it's going to be an exciting summer. That's the thing about the World Series now. There's just so much crazy action thrown in nowadays with the one drop starting. And I mean, this year on an off year, I don't know what's going to happen with the one drop. Last year was not a good sign for it. The truth of it is that, it's great to help out charity, and that it's awesome that it's doing that. As a one-off event, he got like a bunch of rich amateurs to sign up, and that in turn, a bunch of pros came and signed up, which, as much as it's like great to help out charity, the truth is, for a professional putting up $1 million and then asking a bunch of people to buy pieces of him, a profitability aspect does come into play as well.
Right.
And especially even if just one time maybe it wasn't that important, if you're going to do the event every other year, it does become important. You can't really ask people just on an every other year basis to just like take one for the team. You're trying to raise $1 million. So I think what you saw was when less amateur players played the second time, even though they had one extra table available, so they could have jumped from 48 to 56, there was actually less people. They didn't even get as many as the first time. And it's kind of not a good sign. And that's what's just going to happen, because you just can't rake an event 11.1%, even for charity, on an event like that big, on $1 million buy-in event, and just have, and just get a bunch of professionals to do it. It's just a lot of money to raise. And, the field, we'll see whether or not there'll be another $1 million buy-in event. Like it might not happen again. I don't know. But the 100K one is a little bit more reachable. Like, I think that's an event that, a lot more amateur players can put up the money. If you're a guy worth like 40 million, which is a lot, and you're an amateur poker player, you can probably figure out a way to put up 100K, but $1 million is like another story, that's a significant percentage of your net worth now. And in a situation where not only are you not a good poker player, so yeah, it's rough.
Wow. Well, I mean, thank you so much for coming on, Brian. Where can people find out about your seminars?
I look up zenpokermentoring.com. It's Zen Poker's the name of it. Yeah, and Elliot, thank you very much, by the way, for contributing to our first poker seminar.
Yeah, it was good fun.
Yeah, I really appreciate you coming out and doing that. And, I think the guided meditation is a really great way that you can increase your self-awareness. And I think that, as I said earlier, is probably for a person trying to win in poker in the long run is one of the most important things they can do.
I appreciate you saying it, and look forward to seeing you again at the World Series.
Yeah, thank you very much.
We'll see you this summer.
Yes. Yeah.
Cheers, Ron.
Cheers, Elliot.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Well, that was great to hear from Brian. So, Tricia, where can people find out about you?
You can go over to my website, drtriciacardner.com, or follow me on Twitter at Dr. Tricia Cardner.
And if people are interested in my MP3s or my coaching, they can find me at pokermindcoach.com. We look forward to talking to you all next week.
Bye.